my presentation is the Statistical Keys to Success in High School Basketball. And my mentor was our coach, Phil Brockman, but he couldn't make it today, unfortunately. And I chose to do it on basketball because I played at Concordia all 4 years, and I love playing a lot. And basically, in my project, I took the stats from our season, and I used and analyzed them to see what stats helped us as a team to be the most successful. Next slide. Season recap. We had a 14-13 overall record, so we were above 500. And then we got 7th place in the SAC, so in conference, which, I mean, that's an okay finish. It's not bad. And then we had 51 points per game on offense, which is not very good offensively. It's pretty low. But on defense, we only allowed 49 points per game, which was really, really good. So that was one of our strengths. And then the highlight of the season was that we were sectional champions for the first time in 11 years. And that was by far the best part of the year, because that was our goal the entire season, and that's what we were working for and trying to get the entire time. Next slide. So these are some stat definitions. These are just what the meaning is of the stats that I'll be using throughout the project. So 2 FGA, 2-point field goals attempted, 3 FGAs, 3-point field goals attempted. Assists are passes that lead directly to a field goal. Blocks are when a defensive player deflects an offensive player's field goal attempt. Turnovers are when a team loses possession of the ball to the other team without taking a shot. Steals are when a defensive player obtains possession of the ball after a turnover. Deflections are when a defensive player gets their hand on the ball on a non-shot attempt. Fouls are an infraction of the rules more serious than a violation. Charges is an offensive foul that happens when an offensive player runs into a defensive player who is in an established stationary position. And then rebounds are when a player retrieves the ball after having missed a field goal. Next slide. And so these stats, these are our team stats compared to our opponent's stats for the entire year as a whole. And so the green, the positive ones, are ones that favored us this year and helped us. And so turnovers, we had 3.85 less turnovers per game than our opponents. Points per game, we had 2 more points per game, 51 to 49. And then steals, we had 2.37 more steals per game than our opponents. Fouls, we had 1.85 less fouls per game than our opponents. Charges, we had 0.3 more charges per game. In deflections, we had 3.70 more deflections per game. And the negative and the red, these are the things that hurt us throughout the year. And so assists, we had 0.56 less assists per game. We had blocks, we had 0.85 less blocks per game. Rebounds, we had 1.41 less rebounds per game. And then with shooting, for field goal percentage, we had 2.50% worse per game. 3-point field goal percentage, we were at 6.56% worse per game. And free throw percentage, we were at 0.45% worse per game. And so all 3 of those, with our shooting in general, was just, I mean, it's just really below par. And our shooting hurt us throughout the season badly. And it was something we worked on, but we're struggling with throughout the entire year. Next slide. So these are graphs of the points per game versus 2-point field goals attempted and 3-point field goals attempted. And so on the graph on the top left, you can see for the more 2-point field goals we attempted, we scored more points. But for the bottom right graph, when we shot more 3-point field goal attempts, we scored less points. And the reason for that would be when we shot more threes, we obviously had to shoot less twos. And so when we shot more threes, it just hurt us because of how bad we were at converting on those. And so the games we decided to shoot more threes harmed us than when we decided to put it in the paint and score that way. Next slide. And so this is just a term that I'll be using for a few comparisons later. It's the stats, so offensive rating. So OR stands for offensive rating. This statistic shows how efficient your team's offense is in terms of scoring and maintaining possession of the ball. This gives a better indicator of a team's offensive performance than points do, as points do not take into account the pace of the game. So if a game's like really fast and one team pushes down the court all the time and just shoots it instantly instead of running their offense, then there's gonna be more points in the game total, but those points won't actually reflect how well your offense was efficiently in scoring the ball each possession as shots up. And so OR stands for points per 100 possessions, and that's how you calculate offensive rating. And then also EFG percentage. EFG percentage stands for effective field goal percentage. This statistic accounts for the increased value of a 3-point field goal compared to a 2-point field goal. And this one is important because instead of just looking at how you shoot the 2s or 3s and like counting them as the same as if they were worth the same points, it gives a better idea of how you shot the ball as in general in terms of like what actually helps you to win because of the point differences. And so EFG percentage equals field goals made plus 0.5 times 3-pointers made divided by field goals attempted. Next slide. And so this is a graph of, these are graphs of offensive rating versus 2-point field goal attempts versus 3-point field goal attempts for our team this year. And so for offensive rating versus 2-point field goal attempts on the top left, the more 2s we shot had no effect on our offensive rating this year. So the more 2s we got up didn't actually increase our efficiency. Instead, if we just held it, it would have helped. And then for 3-point field goal attempts, the more 3s we got up hurt our offensive efficiency and how good we were at scoring the ball this year. And so once again, this shows the fact that 3s really hurt us this year and that it was bad when we shot more of them rather than shooting more 2s and trying to score inside the paint and attacking the basket. Next slide. And so these graphs are offensive rating versus our field goal percentage, or different types of field goal percentage. And so the top left graph is offensive rating. So all these graphs are going to be positive because the better you shoot the ball, the better your offensive rating is going to be. But it shows the differences in how important they were because offensive rating versus 3-point field goal percentage, when you go down to offensive rating versus 2-point field goal percentage, 2-point field goal percentage had 2 times the bigger effect on our offensive rating, which means that how well we shot the 2 was 2 times more important than how well we shot the 3. And then when we go to effective field goal percentage, how well we shot, like the effective field goal percentage was 1.5 times more important than the 2-point field goal percentage. And so, well, first of all, this shows, once again, that shooting the 2s was much more important for us and how well we did in that aspect of the game. And then the effective field goal percentage is being higher. I mean, it just shows, obviously, having a balance of 2s and 3s would be ideal in a perfect world. Next slide. And so the next thing I'll be using is point differential. And point differential can be used to look at a team's success on both the offensive and defensive ends of the floor. And so I'll be using it here to see the effects that different stats had on our overall performance and ability to win by looking at the stats correlation with point differential on a graph. And so basically, instead of just looking at how our team did on offense through offensive rating, point differential will show like which stats actually affected our overall success and how much we won by or lost by, because that's actually what determines like our success as a team is how much in that regard. And so next slide. So the least impactful on the point differential was 2-point field goals attempted. As you see on the graph, 2-point field goal attempts had no correlation with point differential. The more 2s we got up, didn't have a positive or negative effect on point differential. It just stayed constant the entire time. Next slide. Second tier, 3-point field goal attempts, offensive rebounding percentage, assist and assist to turnover ratio had the second lowest impact on point differential. And so the top left graph, point differential versus 3-point field goal attempts, the more 3s we got up, the lower our point differential was. Once again, having 3s hurt us. For offensive rebounding percentage, the more possessions that we got an offensive board increased our point differential slightly. The more assists we had increased our point differential slightly. And then our assist to turnover ratio, the greater that was each game, slightly increased our point differential. But all these had very little correlation, just more than 2-point field goal attempts. And so, next slide. Third tier, turnovers, deflections, and fouls were in the middle in terms of their impact on point differential. And so, point differential versus turnovers, the top left. The more turnovers we had, the lower our point differential was. And then the fouls, the more fouls we had, the lower our point differential was. Like in terms of we lost by more. And then point differential versus deflections, the greater amount of deflections we had, the greater our point differential was in our favor. And these had a decent level of impact. Nothing like outstandingly high, but not very low either in correlation. Next slide. Fourth tier, blocks and rebound differential had the second highest level of impact on point differential. And for rebound differential, that just means how many more rebounds we got compared to our opponent, the amount of rebounds they got. And so both of these were positive. The more blocks and the greater our rebound differential was, the greater our point differential was. And so these two were very important for us this year in terms of how well we succeeded in terms of scoring and playing defense. Next slide. And then most impactful, which was kind of surprising, is steals had the greatest impact and greatest correlation with point differential. And so, yeah, they had a very high correlation with the more steals we had, the greater our point differential was. And so that's that. And next slide. And so this, wins versus losses, this looks at the difference between the wins and losses. Like, so for rebound differential, we had 2.63 rebounds greater per win than per loss. And then turnover differential, we had 4.17 turnovers fewer per win than per loss. Turnover percent differential, which is the percent of possessions where that ends in a turnover for our offense, was 6.22% less. 3-point field goal attempted differential, which was, that's how many how many more field goals we shoot than the other team, was 1.66 3-point field goal attempts fewer when we won than when we lost. So once again, we got less threes, was better for us in terms of winning. And then 2-point field goals attempted differential was 0.88 greater. So we got a 0.88 more 2-point field goal attempts than our opponents, and wins than losses. And assist differential, which is how many more assists we get than the team we're playing, was 3.52 assists greater per win than per loss. Assist to turnover ratio was 0.46 greater. Steal differential was 2.94 greater in our wins than in our losses. And our foul totals were 1.15 fouls fewer, and deflection totals were 2.1 deflections greater in our wins than in our losses. Next slide. And so this is a graph of the comparison and how much this, for wins, like how much more this we had in our wins than our losses, but percent-wise. So like for steals, that's the ratio of steals we got for every possession, and that's in wins compared to how many we got in losses. And so this shows the impact that each one of these had compared to each other. And so by far, steals was the greatest, as you can see by the graph. And if it's blue, that means we had more of these in our wins, and if it's red, we had less of these in our wins. And so 2-point field goal attempt differential didn't have much of an effect on wins or losses. 3-point field goal attempt differential had a big negative effect when we shot more, and it was way better when we shot less. Rebounds and assists both had a medium level of effect, like not much, but not like a very small amount in terms of how we won and lost this year. Turnovers also had a very large effect, and deflections and blocks both had medium levels of effect, same as near assists and rebounds. And fouls had near the deflections in terms of effect, but negative. Next slide. So conclusions, 2s versus 3s. 2-point field goal attempts were more valuable for our team this year, increasing our team's success, while 3-point field goal attempts hurt our success. And we had one of the worst 3-point field goal percentage in the conference, which that explains why they hurt us so much. We just never really got to a point where we could shoot the ball well. Or we'd have some guys who could shoot really well some games, and then really poorly others. So it was inconsistency that hurt us from the 3-point field goal attempt. category. While we had some guys like Cole who were really consistent inside and helped us to score well that way. Our defensive categories carried our team's success this year. Our 49 points allowed per game was crucial to winning. We had one of the lowest points per game allowed in the conference and in the area. 49 points per game is really, really good to allow in defense. And I'm pretty sure Coach said it was the lowest he's ever had as a team for points allowed per game. Pace, how we managed the pace of the game was crucial for our success with the high number of steals we got and the low turnover rate. And a lot of teams want to play their own pace. Like some teams like to play really fast, like Wayne did. But if you can control the pace of the game and how you control the ball and don't turn it over and how you get steals on your defensive end of the floor, then it makes a big difference in managing the game and keeping your players in a position to win the game. And we did that pretty well this year. On offense, we struggled on the offensive end of the court, trailing opponents in all types of shooting percentage, free throws, 2-point field goal percentage in general. The overall field goal percentage and 3-point field goal percentage, and then our low 51 points per game hurt our ability to succeed. Our 51 points per game, it was one of the lowest in the area as well, which is not good. So that really hurt us. And that's next slide. Yeah.